Welcome back to Pensari Basketball Lives. I know it's been a minute since I did one of these. There's a good reason, but let's talk about it. The Raptors break the internet in a slow news cycle day by signing Garrett Temple. All right, let's talk about this because this is not exactly what was promised, right? And I hear the chatter on Twitter. The Raptors 5 years too late on Garrett Temple, right? He spent the last 2 years with the New Orleans Pelicans. Last year, averaged 7 minutes per game, 2 points per game, 25 minutes. Is this the shooting that the Raptors need? Is this the veteran leadership that the Toronto Raptors need? And most importantly, what does this mean for our beloved Jeff Dowtin on this channel? If you're a fan of this channel, you know that I love Jeff Dowtin, and I would hate to think that this means that this is the end of his Raptor tenure. Before we start talking about what's been going on in Raptorland, I just want to remind you this is a call-in show. So you can call in and we can talk about this. And I think that a dialogue would be far, far more interesting than a monologue on this. And I'm genuinely curious to know what you think about this. Because, I mean, my take on this is going to be pretty short and sweet. I also want to say that we uploaded a video an hour and a half ago, and it is awesome. And it is a full 15 to 16-minute interview with Darko Rajakovic in which he talks about OG Anunoby, Grady Dick, Marquise Noel, and perhaps most importantly and most at length, Scotty Barnes. He talks about his challenges and unique perspective as a big playmaker. We'll certainly touch a little bit on my reflections on that entire interview. And I'll share with you a little bit about how that whole interview came to be. And, big shout outs again to Tony Horvath for setting it up. So, short and sweet, this doesn't faze me. It's a minimum contract. It's a 1-year deal. There's no player option, thank God. And look, I don't think that it's necessarily our place as NBA fans to gauge accurately, especially accurately, what a player means to a particular locker room, right? Now, of course, we have heard, Thaddeus Young was brought in for veteran leadership and then the entire ship sank last year. It's a little bit different when we're talking about leadership issues and the guy who's supposed to be the voice in the locker room that calms everyone down isn't the guy who's playing. I don't think the Raptors are going to have leadership issues this year because I think Scotty Barnes is a really good leader. So I think the service that Garrett Temple could provide potentially for the Toronto Raptors is mainly as a voice of reason, a voice of guidance, perhaps someone, who can impart some wisdom on these young cats. You have a lot of talent on this team, okay? A lot of young guys who are competing for roster spots. And quite frankly, undoubtedly, 2 to 3 of those guys are not going to get minutes consistently, right? You look down this roster, and if you believe in those 12 guys, and if you don't think that you're cursed in terms of injuries, there's really no need to bring someone in who you expect to play major minutes. Like, I'm not saying that this is preferable. I'm just saying it's acceptable, right? You also don't know what this roster is going to look like come training camp. There's still some, word that they could be making some more trades. I don't think that this is a set roster. I think you might be feeling very differently about this if you end up trading away, Pascal Siakam. I think that the role of veterans, end of bench guys who don't necessarily play a lot, don't necessarily have a ton of utility on the court. And I mean, let's not mince words about this. Garrett Temple is awful. Like, this is how I felt about Will Barton, but worse. He's worse than Will Barton. And Will Barton was a disaster. The difference is you needed Will Barton last year. I don't think you need Garrett Temple at all. I don't think you need him to play. I think you do need him to be a guiding voice. As I said, there's clips of him online talking about how to guard Damian Lillard. He's I spent some time, I'm not overly familiar with Garrett Temple. I'm not going to cap on that, but I spent some time listening to interviews with this guy and just trying to get a sense of how he engages with young players. Because let's be honest, the players in New Orleans, the young players in New Orleans, they did really well last year. And I'm not saying it's all him. There's certainly it takes a village to raise a young man. But you can't argue with the fact that, since he's been there the last 2 years, those kids have actually grown. They've seen progress from, and honestly, they have one of the best young haul rosters, like in terms of players under 25 that I love. A lot of them are on that team, from Trey Murphy to Dyson Daniels to Herb Jones. And those are all wings. Those are definitely guys that he has had a relationship with. He talked about it extensively. I encourage you after this video to go and check out his, before you judge this entirely, on the numbers of 2 points per game, 25, games played, seven minutes, which is not impressing anybody. And his analytics are god awful, like really bad. Don't judge that. Judge the interview. I'm not even kidding. Judge the interview. Judge his relationships. Actually, I'm very lucky because one of the games that I did attend this year was against the New Orleans Pelicans, and I got to sit like courtside, which was really cool. So I got to see Zion. I got to see Dyson. Dyson Daniel wasn't playing. Zion wasn't playing. That's my cursed luck that two of my favorite players in the NBA weren't playing that game. But I got to see Garrett Temple, and I remember him very clearly talking to guys at the end of the bench, giving them, the pep talk when they came out of the game. If he is capable of doing this, if at this stage he is in that area of his career where he's just looking for one more contract, his entire utility on the court is not come in and shoot 3-pointers, come in and ISO ball. This is a guy who's literally there to teach, to impart, to calm, And look, I think there is probably justifiably some sense of unease with the Raptors organization right now, right? You have a first-time head coach. You have a 21-year-old who's about to turn 22, very soon, who is, going to be given a major leadership opportunity. And as good as you think he is, as wise and mature as you think he is, he's still going to be 22 years old. And that's going to be one of your leaders now. And that veteran voice, as much as we may have disliked him, Fred VanVleet was a professional. He was a workman. He was an extension of the management. He was an extension of the coaching staff, for better or for worse, right? That guy who gives the marching orders, that guy who can take, the young guy and kind of set him right, that guy who can, be in the locker room and get a pulse for what's happening with the team, because, I'm not saying he's a spy, but this often becomes the case, where veterans like Thaddeus Young will often be consulted by Nick Nurse and ask, hey, what's going on with Precious Achiuwa? What are you seeing in him? What's going on with him? And he's the one who'll be able to tell you he's staying up all night. He's doing this. He's doing that. He's the one who's, dipping out of practice a little too early. He's the one, and maybe it's not necessarily as, tattletale-y, but maybe it's, he's got to be the guy. And I think last year, if you followed this team, those are the conversations that weren't happening, right? The previous year, they were happening a lot. You would often see Thaddeus Young go over to Scotty Barnes or OG Anunoby and gently, remind them of something that they're doing wrong on the floor or guide them in a way. And I think that that's a really good thing. I think it's a great tone setter to have a veteran who's over himself. I think it's a great tone setter to have someone who's mature. And again, listening to his interviews, he seems very mature. I want to say beyond his years. He's older than me. But he seems very level-headed. And I think this is the type of presence that in your locker room, it's going to help. Now, look, does this mean Jeff Dowtin is gone? That would suck, right? That would really suck, because Jeff is just hitting his prime and Garrett Temple is well past his prime. And I could make a very solid argument that Jeff Dowtin is twice the player today that Garrett Temple is. So if you get rid of Jeff Dowtin, who last year in very limited minutes probably had a better season than the last 4 Garrett Temple seasons combined, then I'm going to be pissed. Yeah, I will vent. I will be very upset about that. But I'm not ready to be upset about something that hasn't happened yet. And I don't think that that's going to happen. I think that they believe in Jeff Dowtin. Now, I've been wrong before. I thought that they would keep Joe Wieskamp. He's gone. And Garrett Temple in his place. If Joe Wieskamp was not going to play for you, I think Garrett Temple brings a little bit more to your team in terms of stability and leadership. Now, is this auto injury insurance? I don't think so. I really don't. I think that's Jalen McDaniels. I think let's talk about the part where the NBA is a little bit confused. Read a lot of stuff today after the signing that, whoa, what are the Raptors doing here? This guy's 37 years old. And I think that makes sense, right? You're going to be bad next year. You've lost Fred VanVleet. You didn't make the playoffs last year. And what are you doing signing a 37-year-old when you could be taking a wild swing at a young prospect or a former lottery flameout, right? Like your Stanley Johnsons. Does a Stanley Johnson, a guy who's kind of fizzled out of, a couple of lottery pick prized opportunities, does that player really bring anything to your locker room, or is that just one more guy fighting for a spot at the bowl, right? It's almost like addition by subtraction to some extent, right? So I don't dislike the move until I see whether or not this impacts Jeff Dowtin's future on this team. Now, obviously, you've gotten rid of a lot of young players in order to free up a roster spot. You got rid of Justin Champagnie, granted he wanted out. You got rid of Delano Banton, granted, maybe you didn't see necessarily a future with him, and I'm not really sure you can really play him on this team. You have OG, you have Scotty, you have Pascal. Where is he supposed to fit in, right? Unless you felt like his jump shot was progressing, and it was not, right? I'm still most upset. Like between the three players that I just mentioned, Delano Banton, Joe Wieskamp, and Justin Champagnie, I'm guaranteed like 4 years from now, I think the one that's going to hurt the most is Justin Champagnie. But I could be wrong. So you freed up this roster spot in order to give it to a vet. But what does this really mean, right? It's only confusing if you expect the Raptors to be bad. I'm just being straight up. Because if the Miami Heat made this signing, I don't think anyone would say anything. If the Phoenix Suns made this signing, I don't think anyone would say anything. It's not like he's not an NBA player. He's barely an NBA player, but he's still an NBA player. He brings something. But this idea that this is a stupid move for the Toronto Raptors because they're supposed to be bad, well, I got news for you. I don't think the Raptors are going to be bad. I don't think the Raptors are expecting to be bad. I don't think Masai Ujiri expects to be bad. I don't think Darko Rajakovic is planning to be bad. I mean, everything that I heard in that interview, and I mean, it's condensed. Like there was a 33-minute interview, and we condensed it down to 15 minutes because I just genuinely suspected that people would tune out of a Serbian language video, even though we added subtitles. So, I mean, there's a lot in that interview, the 33-minute clip, and maybe someday I'll be able to post the whole thing in one of the lives, and I'll just translate as he's speaking. But he expects to win, man. Like, he expects to be good. Like, everything that they're doing right now, they're expecting to be really, like, competitive. And they're expecting to get better throughout the year. So I just want to throw caution to the wind. If the Raptors start, like, 1-5, don't panic. Like, this is supposed to be bad, and it's supposed to get better as the season goes along. And that's really what Darko Rajakovic was talking about in the whole interview. He was talking about how they want to get better week by week, month by month, and they want to really assess this season, like the season that's coming up. They're going to assess it at the end of the season. And they want to see, did we get better? Are we playing our best basketball going into the playoff run? So early on, there will be some growing pains, but if you're expecting to be a team that's pushing for the playoffs, then this is probably the type of player and the type of person in your locker room who actually helps that. Let's talk about that interview. So how did it come about? So Tony is he's a media personality and a journalist. He's based in former Yugoslavia in Croatia. And so he had a contact with Darko Rajakovic, which is really cool because, Darko is the only coaching candidate of the Raptors that I followed on Instagram prior to. So I was very amazed, surprised, overjoyed that when the Raptors hired him. But Tony actually knows him. He's talked with him. I believe they've met, and they kept in touch over the years. And so he sent me a message saying, "Hey man, do you have some questions that you would like to ask Darko Rakovic? Because this is like really cool. I'm setting up an interview with him. And so we set up this thing where he would release the entire thing in Serbian Croatian uh, via their website and via their as an article. And I would get the access to the video link. And what is hilarious is through Pendance, we've done some translation work for trailers that didn't have English subtitles. And I remember asking my friend Toru to do a Japanese translation once. And this was a minute trailer, and it took her like 2 hours. And I didn't understand how a translation could take 2 hours until I had to do this. 33 minutes. I tell you, that interview took close to 12 to 13 hours to decode and translate. And it seems simple enough, but every time I sent it to him, it was like, this is not good enough. This doesn't make sense. This word is wrong. So give that video a like if you can. Even if you have already seen it, go back and give it a like. It believe it or not, these videos do take time, and that's probably why I haven't posted for a while. Briefly to explain my bit of an absence here. Look, man, like doing this for an entire year, it was a lot, right? I mean, we've grown a lot, and I'm very thankful for that. And we have a vibrant community here, and I love it. But it's been a lot. Like, it's been a lot of work, and it's been a lot of work for not a ton of money. So obviously, I have to sometimes take a week to reorient myself, focus on things that are paying me a lot, like editing or directing or script editing and stuff like that. This past week, I really devoted time to clearing out our house. Like, my girlfriend and I, we were just trying to, start a new life. I'll go into details at some point, but trying to start a new chapter in our lives. And, it was very important to get rid of old clutter and to do all of that stuff. So that's what we did. And, we're doing fantastically well now. And that was a really welcome thing. I also needed to organize my hard drives and stuff. There's a lot of, ideas that I have from Inside Basketball. The truth is, I'm not a very organized person. And sometimes it takes me 4 hours to do something that would take me 2 hours if I was a better organized person. And this just comes down to editing, right? Like, where is that clip? How do I find that clip? So organizing hard drives, especially when you have accumulated like probably 300 gigabytes worth of footage, PNG files, etc. If you're not organized in the sense, like whenever I see how Leo Bias from Basketball Zone, or even Goateology from Goateology, when I see how these guys process this stuff and how organized they are, I'm put to shame. I'm just always like, wow, like you guys like have it right, and I clearly have it wrong. So it was just about organizing myself and getting myself right. And I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I did it because I feel more upbeat. I feel happy. To the overall tone of this channel, look, man, like we are going to be optimistic until there is a reason to not be optimistic. Okay. I understand that Garrett Temple is not gonna, elicit joy or have you throwing a party or, drinking with your buddies tonight, celebrating like, wow, man, we got Garrett Temple. Like, look at us now, right? I get that. And I'm pretty sure you probably didn't feel that way about Dennis Schroeder. I'm pretty sure some of you didn't feel that way about Grady Dick or Jalen McDaniels. What I'm sensing from this team is a clear identity shift. That might sound like a hot take, but it feels like this is something that I've, let's call it, gleaned, learned, observed in life. That the best way to solve a problem is to admit you have a problem, right? Vocalize it, call it out. If you have a drinking problem, call it out. If you have past trauma, call it out. You have to accept it. Acceptance is the first step to solving any problem. The Raptors have accepted that what they did last year did not work. I think they have accepted that the leadership that they were being provided last year was insufficient. I think they've accepted that they need a center on their roster, or at least someone who can protect the rim. I think they've accepted that 6'9", Vision 6'9" doesn't work if nobody can shoot. And I think that this is a bit of a pivot, and maybe it was a freakish experiment that wasn't given the full run that it deserved, because there was, in the middle of Vision 6-9, there was always like this 5'11" point guard who was, in a weird way getting credit for everything, but also in a different way kind of screwing everything up, because a lot of the advantages that lineup could possess are kind of thrown away when you have a player that undersized taking so many shots. So I think to some extent this is a step in the right direction, to fire everybody, like the way that they did, like their entire coaching staff. Like, this is unprecedented in Masai Ujiri's tenure. Like, how absolutely bad must you think things were to have done this? And they talked all off season about two things. And if you're really listening carefully to Bobby Webster, Masai Ujiri, even Darko Rakovic, the entire focus of this team is two-pronged. Number one, reestablish identity. Number two, support Scottie Barnes. That's it. That's exactly what it is, and if a player does not work with him, they're not coming into Toronto. And that's the way it should be. That honestly is the way it should be. Now, let's talk about Scottie projections, because look, there was a video that surfaced. He's been doing some pro-am runs, and obviously there was a video that surfaced of him playing one-on-one, getting fouled a lot. If I'm being honest, you actually slow that down. He got fouled like half the times he was going up. And he struggled one-on-one, man. He struggled hard. The bag wasn't very big. The shots weren't going in. It looked awful. And it's not like he's going up against OG Anunoby or Mikal Bridges. Like, he was going up against Marvin Bagley and Andre Drummond. Shouldn't our future franchise player, shouldn't this, guy that everyone wants to build everything around, or not everybody, but half the fan base wants to build this thing around, shouldn't he be able to score on Marvin Bagley one-on-one? Here's the thing. There are a lot of players that could score on Marvin Bagley every single time down the court and not crack an NBA rotation. I've learned this from watching a lot of pro-ams over the years and watching a lot of one-on-one between players. Certain players really thrive in one-on-one. Certain players don't. And I think for Scottie, this is a weakness. It's always been a weakness. It's always I don't know if it's always going to be a weakness, but I don't think it's ever going to be a strength, right? Like Cade. That's a guy who could probably like dust people one-on-one. Jalen Green, that's a dude who could probably like do some damage one-on-one, right? These are guys who have a bigger bag. They have a shifty handle. And I mean, really, if you've ever played one-on-one in any capacity at any level, you understand that one-on-one is a completely different game. Like, this is like saying you could be a pro golfer because you did well in the putt golf or in mini golf. Like, it's not the same thing. Yeah, you're kind of doing the same thing, but it's not the same game. And Scottie's gifts are purely like team. I'm pretty sure Nikola Jokic would struggle one-on-one. Like, I know that seems pretty hard for people to believe, but like defensively, like he couldn't stay in front of a dude, so he probably would struggle one-on-one. Some players just don't. And I mean, of course, there are players who are great in both situations, like a Kobe Bryant. Like, that's a guy who could probably kill you one-on-one, kill you 3-on-3, kill you 5-on-5. His game is kind of predicated on that sense, but there are just certain players who don't do that well one-on-one. So I guess it's worth at least touching on, what do we expect from Scottie Barnes next year? And, if there are no calls and there's, nobody calling in, then we'll just wrap it after this subject. But if you want to call in, again, the link is in the description. I did a poll for Pensar Basketball on Instagram. Shout outs to Pensar Basketball on Instagram. If you're not following Pensar Basketball on Instagram, please do follow it. Did a poll on what would be a successful year for Scottie Barnes. And the vast majority of people voted that it would have to be a fringe all-star. Fringe all-star. That, 22, 8, and 7, I think I said, with, the Raptors making the play-in, was the most popular answer. I think maybe 15 to 20% of people had something below that, like marginal progress. And then I think 5 or 6% of people had 16, 6, and 6, just get like a little bit better than last year. And that would be success. And then, of course, there was, I think 10, 12% of people who had their sights set on like borderline all NBA. Like that's going to be success in year three. That's what we believe in this guy. I think the truth will probably fall somewhere in between options 2 and 3. I think he'll be a 20 point, 22 point per game scorer. But again, with Scotty, I don't think the box score is ever going to tell the entire story with him. Obviously, with a more featured role on offense, he's going to get more assists for sure. With more shooters around him, he's going to get more assists. With more ball movement, the team is going to get more assists. And obviously, by process of the team getting more assists and him having the ball, like it would not surprise me one bit if he comes out and averages 8 to 9 assists per game. And then everyone's going to be singing a very different tune about him being a point guard, right? Because the casual fan is going to see 9 assists and be like, okay, he's one of the best point guards in the NBA. Congratulations. I think in the interview with Darko Rakovic, he mentioned something which was very interesting, which he said, Scotty needs to be a better shooter. Scotty needs to improve his left hand, and he needs to get better off the bounce, better in the pick and roll. And so I think that this is going to be the most important thing for Scotty. And I just want to take you through what I think are my 4 steps for Scotty Barnes to actually hit the heights that this channel and I personally believe that he can. So step 1, really, he's taken it already. And that was to become a positive contributor on the basketball court, right? This was really a step that he took in year 1. And I mean, look, we just signed Garrett Temple. I don't think Garrett Temple has ever really been a positive player in the NBA. And I'm not trying to shit on Garrett Temple. He kind of has his own utility and he's a specialist and he does certain things on the basketball court that are useful, but he's never been like a net positive player. I think there's like 1 season, maybe 2 seasons in his entire career, which has spanned like a decade plus, in which he's even registered a positive box plus minus. I think his career box plus minus is like negative 2.1. And he's carved out a very long career, which should probably tell you something about the type of person he is, to be honest. Scotty became a positive player in year 1. Like as a rookie, he was positive. As a sophomore, he was positive. There's an overwhelming, he's one of, like, I don't care how high or low you are on him. He's one of the top 100 players in the NBA, right? Fred VanVleet said he's easily top 50. Well, Scotty is, by the most generous estimates, a top 100 player in the NBA. At the age of 20, 21, he was a top 100 player in the NBA. Where can he take that? Well, to get from where he was projected as a rookie, right, at the draft, not once he started playing and people started to adjust their expectations, but where he was at the draft, I think it would have shocked absolutely no one if you had told people that he would be like, after his first year, that he was like the 180th to 220th to 250th best player in the NBA. It would have been disappointing for sure, especially if Jalen Suggs or Franz Wagner or someone picked right behind him had really popped. But I think that could have been within the realm of, okay, it's expectable. It's expected. He's raw. He doesn't have a jumper yet, etc. He's young. He's a freshman, right? So I think that jump from the 240th best player to being a top 100 player was a really crucial one. And I think overall, if you really go down the list of every single player in the NBA, you'll probably find that about 120 are actually like net positive players. Everyone else is kind of like neutral, very, very neutral, like on the dot neutral, borderline neutral, or like a negative player. And that doesn't mean that they're necessarily hurting their team. They're just hurting their team relative to an average player in the NBA. And the average is very much skewed up by the best players. So that first step was really just about learning to be on the court despite his weaknesses. And his weaknesses were plenty. The handle was weak, the jump shot's weak, the package, the scoring assertiveness, etc., comes and goes. There's so much to learn as a rookie on defense. So just holding water, treading water. Now, I'm saying he's a top 100 player generously. In my estimate, he's probably closer to a top 60, top 65 player right now, which is really impressive as a 21-year-old. So how do we go from top 65 to about top 40, top 35? How do we make that jump? Well, that jump is the jump that I think that is happening right now, and that is his handle. That handle needs to get tighter. He's not turnover prone. He just doesn't try a lot. And the lack of trying with your handle can really limit how much you can shift defenses, how much you can manipulate. And I think that that manipulation has to happen because once it happens, well, then now suddenly the jumper isn't as big a concern, right? Ben Simmons, Russell Westbrook, these are guys with like tight, low handles, and they were able to counteract the fact that they were completely non shooters. In the case of Ben Simmons, a complete non shooter. In the case of Russell Westbrook, a very limited and poor shooter that people often gave clear, take whatever you want. And he's not really as bursty or as switchy or twitchy an athlete as either one of those guys in terms of just like getting past his man, first step, etc. So he's really going to have to use his handle. Like craft is going to have to become a really big part of his game. And I know that he is athletic, but he is a different type of athletic. Like there's like I'm not a doctor. I'm not a trainer. I don't want to talk out of my butt about this, but obviously, like you can see when you're watching somebody who is just like explosive and twitchy, like a Shaden Sharp, and you can see when you have more of a functional athlete who maybe has a great vert, great reach, etc. But there is like a bit of a slowness and a plodding to his game. And I'm not saying Scotty's slow. I'm definitely not saying that. He's fast as hell in the open court, but there is a sort of explosiveness off the bounce, explosiveness, and some of that will get better just by improving the handle. That sounds kind of crazy, but if you play basketball, I think you know that as you become sure with your handle, I think you just become more athletic, like in a sense, like you're able to use your athleticism and athletic tools in a much better way. Someone like Giannis, right? Like he's not a great ball handler, but he has long strides and he's able to take care of the ball just enough. I think for Scotty to take that step to 35, top 35 player in the NBA, which would be just amazing for the Raptors, right? Because they become a playoff team if he's a top 35 player next year, in my opinion. Because if Siakam's top 20 and OG's top 40 and he's top 35, well, then you have 3 of the top 40 players in the NBA. And I could make a really strong case for Jakob Poeltl being in that group too. Like, how bad do you expect this team to be, especially when you're actually factoring in that there's more depth this year? Like, how do you be bad if you have 4 top 50 guys in the NBA and maybe 6 other guys who can make a very strong case for the top 100? Like, I think, there's some real reason for optimism here. So I think that you could make a strong case that handle getting tighter, that handle becoming more dynamic, it's not only going to open up his scoring, it's also going to open up his passing, man. Like the amount that he can manipulate. Like if you can start shifting defenses with your handle, it just makes your passing even more interesting. It makes the opportunities greater. So I think that that's going to be the next step. Now, the step after that is the total package of isolation, right? Like being able to get your game off in like 1 to 2 dribbles from 8 to 9 different places on the court. So from the top of the key, from the nail, from the corner, from the post, like just being able to score one-on-one and in such an efficient fashion that the defense has to collapse. That when you put the ball on the court, and a great example of this is Kawhi. Another great example of this is Paul Pierce. Like neither of these guys are super twitchy, but they're really solid isolation scorers that could do a lot. And they had a bag and they had counters and they had a complete package, which saw them being like 3-level scorers. And I mean, seriously, like Scotty Barnes is on a completely different level as an athlete compared to someone like Paul Pierce, right? So the craft has to come and the expansion of the overall skills package has to come. And it's not just a dribble, right? Like dribbling is one thing. Dribbling is navigation from point A to point B on the basketball court in interesting, selective, and creative ways in order to generate an advantage against the defense. The isolation scoring stuff is how you use that dribble, how you use your size, how you use advantages to actually score. And I think that that step could take him into top 20 conversation, top 15 conversation. Now, is top 15 what you're expecting from Scotty Barnes? I think that would be a hell of an outcome. Wouldn't you agree? A top 15 player picked 4th overall. I think that's a, first or second percentile outcome. And I think everyone would be really happy if he becomes a top 15 player. Now, to those of you who are dreaming of more than that, I think that final step that he has to take beyond the dribbling, beyond the isolation scoring, beyond, just getting himself overall, like in great um, positions, like just learning the game and that sort of growth that just comes with age and experience. The final step, of course, will be shooting. Once he can shoot at this size, if he ever becomes, I don't even have, he doesn't have to become a great shooter. He doesn't have to become Clay. Obviously, he's not going to become Clay. If he can become like a 35% three-point shooter and like a 50% mid-range shooter, like it's curtains. That is where you start entering top 8, top 7, top 6 territory. And then from there, it's just about reps, experience. Some guys age out. And now you can start, you start to enter Jason Tatum territory, right? Maybe not quite Luka Doncic territory, but like right there, like right on the cusp of that. Because you become a 3-level scorer, you become a guy who's consistently double teamed with his passing, his skills, his size, his athleticism, his knowledge of the game. I mean, seriously, like this is stuff that takes people 15 years in the NBA to really figure out some of the stuff that he's doing just off the cuff on instinct. And it's never really, so I guess like to sort of close this off, when he came out, right, I implore you to Google Sam Vecini's, last big board prior to the 2021 draft. I think he was sixth. He was sixth or seventh on that board. Jalen Suggs and Cade Cunningham, who have combined for a whopping -1 win share combined total, as Scotty sits on, I think, 11.3, 11.4, 11.6, 11.6. Those two guys, I mean, they were at the top of the board because I think they were just so advanced. And I think that these advantages show up more in the youth level. But it has never surprised me, how raw people thought he was, right? Because he was that raw. It just, he somehow succeeded anyway, if that makes sense. Like, I have watched so much tape of kids in AAU who are in grade 10 who have more advanced scoring packages, more advanced handle, more advanced turnaround, more fluid ball movement and movement patterns around the league, around the court than he does as a second-year professional. Now, you can look at this one of two ways. Obviously, glass half empty. You can say, well, he doesn't have it yet. He'll never get it, whatever. Like, how is he supposed to be good if there's some kid in grade 10 who could, who has a shiftier handle and better footwork in the post and can get his game off better? Like, how is he supposed to be like this franchise savior and future MVP, Hall of Famer, like Rob, you capping? Like, how is he supposed to be that good if he's so bad right now? Glass half full, you can say, how has a player who is so far from touching anything reasonable in terms of what his apex could be in terms of skill, how has that player managed to be successful on the basketball court, playing the number of minutes he has, playing the role he has in the offense that he played in? I think you can look at it as, like, a lot of people like to say about Toronto Raptor players that they are successful because they are playing for the Raptors. I imagine someone like a Scotty Barnes playing, for the Lakers, right? Like, feeding off of LeBron and AD, or playing in Golden State, feeding off of Steph and Clay. And I just imagine how much better this guy would be in that situation. So in a lot of ways, right, like, you've put this guy in the absolute worst position, right? He's playing with players that just don't fit with him. He's playing next to a point guard who kind of made him into a center. It's kind of a strange thing where you can make an argument that, yeah, that's what his skill set dictates, and he's just kind of a hustle big at this point, just kind of getting scraps. But his game, his vision, his IQ is capable of so much more. And yeah, I totally understand where certain analysts like Samson Folk and Oren Weisfeld and these people who come at this, or even Will Liu, who come at this from the perspective of, yo, like, this guy's really, really raw. Yes, but he's also really, really effective. So how do you explain the two? And I think how you explain the two is as follows. Great players find a way to be on the court. They find a way to be really effective. I think Nikola Jokic was really, really good and really impactful as a rookie and as a sophomore. I think his skills package, his shot, everything was so far from refined. Kawhi Leonard, this isolation stuff that he did for the Toronto Raptors during their championship run, he didn't have that in San Antonio. He managed to stay on the court and be a starter for a team that won a championship prior to all of those things in his game rounding out. Paul George is another example of a player. And I understand that, people get upset when you compare Scottie to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard because they don't remember what Paul George was like in Indiana. Like, there was a rule that Paul George couldn't dribble the basketball. Like, I think there was like a rule that the coaching staff had where if I'm remembering this correctly, where if he dribbled the ball and tried to do something off the bounce and lost the ball, that was the last time he got to do that game. Like, the shifty handle, Paul George that you saw in, I don't know, the final year in Indiana or in OKC or now this wasn't the ball. This wasn't him. He was always like, he was just finding a way. He was finding a way, right? Vince Carter didn't have a shifty handle. He had an elite first step. The handle was just never tight. I mean, I remember watching Vince, try to cross a dude up and just lose the ball. Tracy McGrady, so talented, but his skill work took a while as well. I remember watching a game of the Toronto Raptors where Tracy McGrady dribbled the ball up the court and the defender just backed off of him at the free throw line trying to draw a charge, and Tracy McGrady, I think, airballed a free throw line jumper on the break. And this was when he was 21 years old. Like, he was the same age as Scottie. He'd had 3 years of NBA experience at that point. And then who was he with Orlando? Look, man, the skill work will come. If you're a hard worker, the skill set will come. The basketball IQ, the physical stuff, that may never come. And so often you'll see players drafted at the top of the draft, who have this incredible physical profile, like a Bilal Coulibaly. And there's let's say, some banking effort on the part of the front office that drafts this kid that, hey, we can catch the skills up. And maybe they overestimated the basketball IQ because the physical was just too impressive, right? There's a sort of catch-22 where at a youth level or at a young level, like, a player can dominate just because they're bigger, stronger, and just way more athletic and, physically imposing than everybody. But I think Scottie's just never dominated that way. Scottie's always dominated through his mind. And so now, like, you're putting him up against NBA athletes and he stacks up really well. Like, he's doing really well. And you're putting him up, like, mentally against NBA athletes. So now you just have to get the skill work down. And I definitely believe that if he continues down the line that he's going down, and I genuinely believe he's about to have a huge season, man. I really do. I was looking at some odds. I think he's the sixth in terms of betting odds for most improved player. So Vegas thinks that he's going to get better this year. So whether you think he's going to get better or not, Vegas definitely thinks he's going to get better. Here's someone who Vegas does not expect a lot from, Darko Rajakovic. I was shocked to see that the voting odds for Darko Rajakovic winning Coach of the Year is 51-1. Yo, I took that bet. I'm not even suggesting that you bet. I'm not promoting any betting or whatever, but this is craziness. 25th by the ESPN Power Rankings, the Toronto Raptors. This is not the 25th best team in the NBA, yo. These guys are overestimating the shit out of Fred VanVleet, man. I'm just being honest. It is completely ludicrous to suggest that there are 24 teams that are better than the Toronto Raptors in the NBA next year. I think there are at most 18. At most 18 to 19 teams that are better. And at worst, maybe there's 10 teams that are better. So I think that this is going to be one of those seasons. And if you have just looked at the history of Coach of the Year, it has nothing to do with coaching. The only way Coach of the Year is tabulated each year is how much better is the record than the record we were expecting. Because if the record is better, it's not because we completely overestimated or underestimated the roster. It must be because the coach is a magician. And so in this sense, whether Darko Rajakovic deserves Coach of the Year or not, I think he's actually going to be very much in the running for Coach of the Year. And I think that the odds of 51-1 is like the worst odds in the NBA of winning Coach of the Year. I think he's tied in a 3 or 4 way race for worst Worst odds. I mean, jeez, like the expectation and reality element of this is basically the coach of the year is an admission from the NBA media of this is the team that we underestimated. There's a reason why the Toronto Raptors have had three different guys win coach of the year. Wait, Sam Mitchell, Dwayne, yeah, three different guys win coach of the year. Why do you think that is? Because the Raptors are consistently underestimated by the American media, and then the American media overcorrects by handing our coach of the year. Well, I think Darko Rakovic is going to become the fourth NBA coach that coach for the Toronto Raptors that wins coach of the year. And that's, I don't know, I don't think that's a hot take at all, man. And I will be here for it. I hope that there will be more Darko interviews. I hope that I get to sit down with him. I'll certainly push for it at some point. That would be a really great conversation. I think it'd be great. Let's get to some comments here. I've kind of been keeping an eye on it. Seems like you guys are just sort of talking to each other here. The whole season rides on Scotty's improvement. I don't think so. I think he will be definitely he's going to be the swing factor for, how bad it will get. Obviously, if he struggles, this is going to be really bad. Like if he struggles mightily, like if the Fred VanVleet chirpers and, the Scotty critics are right, that Fred VanVleet was basically shielding him from a role that was way beyond his scope and that this role remains beyond his scope, and he struggles immensely to create separation and he struggles to organize the offense, yes, this will be really, really bad. So in a weird way, it hinges on his improvement, but I don't think that he's like necessarily the only thing that needs to work for the Toronto Raptors to be good. I think definitely they need to find something in Christian Koloko or Precious Achua. I think they need some help from Otto Porter. I know that Will Liu, like it never stops bothering me how much he clowns on Otto. Like it actually has never stopped bothering me how much this entire fan base likes to clown Otto. I think he's a really good player. Like I think he's a really, really good player. And I'm just hoping that a healthy season from him could swing the win-loss record by 5 wins, man. Like he's a really good player. And if he starts playing like 20, 25 minutes a night for you and he's healthy for even 50 games, like that's going to swing majorly. And he opens up so much for everybody else too. Again, Precious Achua, Christian Koloko, one of these guys has to emerge as a real serious NBA player. They've both had flashes. Granted, they're both very young. They're both at least 2 to 3 years away from being in their primes. They're both guys who've shown capability as shooters. I think they're both really hard workers. And look, man, like I would not put it past one of these guys to sneaky become really good. And if both of them become really good, well, the Raptors' future just changes dramatically. So look, man, like I understand a lot of fan bases like to go with the everything's going to work out, everything's going to click, and then they end up being really disappointed at the end. I'm not saying everything's going to click. I just think that something's got to click with one of those two guys because you need it, right? Like unless you're banking on Chris Boucher to be your savior at the end of the bench there for in terms of a big rotation, like you need one of those guys to really work out. You need this Scotty thing to work out. And I think, one of your wings, like could Grady be that guy? Like could Grady, like I've been thinking a lot about how much we're expecting from him, right? And some people are saying like, oh, he'll get like 10, 12 minutes a night. I don't think so. I think he's going to get more. And I think as the season goes on, he's going to get more and more and more. And I would not be surprised to look up one day and see Grady Dick play 30 minutes. There's a lot of stuff that he does that is beyond rookie stuff, man. Like some of the stuff, and again, this will depend on how physically, mature he can get in the next 3 months. And that might not be enough time. And he's definitely going to have his struggles for sure. But the way that this guy scores, is very rare. And he's going to be one of the best shooters in the NBA on day one. I'm not saying one of the top 10 shooters. I'm not going to say one of the top 15 shooters, but he'll be like one of the top 30 shooters in the NBA on day one. So if you can't find minutes for that in your lineup, you must be doing really well. it's not even the shooting, man. It's like the where he gets the shots. It's how he gets the shots, and how well the way that he gets shots. Like, you saw all the attention he got in summer league. Like, defenses are pressing up on him. You can't do that with Siakam on the court. You can't do that with Scotty on the court. So once this guy frees up, like, I mean, that Tyler Hero stuff is going to go out the window real fast, because I tell you, Tyler Hero is 6'3", 6'3" and a quarter with short arms. Like, what Grady could be is really staggering. Like, yes, I understand the handle has a lot of work, but again, it's the freaking skill work, man. Again, you have a prospect who physically is very raw, in terms of his definition, in terms of his strength and conditioning. It can take 12 levels up, right? And his game is not very well rounded right now. So, you look at, in that interview with Tony, like, there was a question about OG Anunoby where, the interviewer asked Darko, hey, like, you've had this success record with Desmond Bane, and you've had the success record with Mikal Bridges, right? Like, what do you see in OG Anunoby that you can bring to him? And I'm just, in my head, I'm just thinking, like, yeah, OG, but also Grady. I will be the first to admit when I'm wrong on this season. I promise. Like, if by month 2, I think you'll know. I think you'll know if I'm wrong. I'll be the first to admit, like, okay, like, I was wrong. I apologize. I misread it. I totally overestimated how good some of these players could be. But I don't think I will be wrong, man. I think there's a lot of players on this team that are really hungry to prove something. I think this is going to be a really good season. And I know that maybe, signing Garrett Temple wasn't necessarily something you were anticipating, or wasn't a name that you were looking at. And I'm not even going to sit here and try to tell you that he's some great player. I'm just saying, overall, take a wait and see approach with this roster and see how this impacts Malachi Flynn, whether or not, Jeff Dowtin, whatever, happens. I just think the Raptors have 11 to 12 like serious NBA players. You go down this list, there's 11 to 12 guys who could play on an NBA team. And I think that's saying something for a team that had thinned out as much as they had 2 years ago to kind of rebuild some of that depth, is a very important thing. I think that's a really important thing. You just have more competitive practices. There's a bit more role definition. There's a clearer pecking order. So yeah, and hopefully there's more of a diversity of skills for Darko to use as well. So anyways, that has been my return to lives. And we're leaving at the peak with 187 of you in here. Feel free to definitely check out that video with Darko Rajakovic. The interview is solid. He talks about a lot. He talks about Scotty running point. He talks about, unique advantages and disadvantages of being that size, where he sees the game going, positionless basketball, Grady Dick, Marquise Noel, OG Anunoby, what he plans to do with him, how he hired his his assistants, how his life has changed. So yeah, I thought it was a really cool interview and really cool opportunity. And yes, I really hope that one day, we will be able to do more of this. And, a lot of balls in the air for this channel. Some things didn't work out as I had hoped that they would. Maybe they will still work out because the conversations have been tabled or someone got busy. But I genuinely hope that, as the season progresses and as more people discover the work that we're doing here and the community we're building, that the opportunities will come for bigger interviews, that hopefully, bigger sponsors, obviously, bigger following, more views, more subscriptions, etc. And from my end, I will do everything to make that possible through higher quality videos. I really want to get into making like consistently great videos again. And I think last summer we really took off as a channel because we were making like much better videos. And I think these videos can take like 10 steps up from where they were last summer too. So anyways, nice to return to lives. I kind of missed this, but to be honest, I kind of also didn't miss it. And it was really good to take, 6-7 days to myself and just recalibrate and refresh. And hopefully I look a little bit more refreshed. I haven't slept very much, in all honesty, but generally over the last week, I've looked a lot more refreshed, and I'm just like, damn, like, okay, like maybe this will be a much better face to put on camera, someone who doesn't look so chronically underslept. Sorry, I'm just trying to read these. Oh, thank you. We missed the lives. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, look, like we're definitely going to be doing post game lives all year, but I just want like more variety in the content as well. You know, to be able to do interviews, to be able to do video breakdowns, to be able to do even X's and O's breakdowns. That would be really cool. But you need to have your shit organized. Like you need to have all of your folders, all of your graphics packages, all of your green screen stuff. Like you cannot do things the way I've done things. Like I tell you that Brian Macon video, like with Scotty's trainer, that video took me 34 hours. If I was organized, it probably would have taken me 8. So it's just like speeding up the process. If I'm not going to outsource this, like if I can't, like if we, like, trust me, the minute these videos start making like 100,000, 100, 200,000 views, I'm outsourcing a lot of stuff that I can't outsource right now. Just, it wouldn't economically make sense. I can't hire someone who's better than me at this stuff right now. But hopefully, in time, I will be able to hire people who are much better than me at doing this stuff so that I can just focus on churning out content. Like it would be great. Like I have 1,000 ideas every single day in 24 hours. And I realize I'm not using them as well as I could be, but alrighty. That's funny. Clutch Tatum, I assure you, he would not have been. But he was decent. I thought Hero was 6'7". No, he's not. He's about 6'3" and bit or 6'4", 6'4" and a bit. Sorry, I misquoted. I think he's 6'4" with 6'3" wingspan. Like that's a far cry from Grady Dick. I mean, Grady Dick's like what, 6'6" and a half, 6'7" with like a 6'10", 6'9" wingspan. Like it is a very different thing. Like when his shoulders broaden out, if you put Grady Dick and Tyler Hero next to each other, like if they stand next to each other at some point, it's not splitting hairs difference. It's not like here, it will be a difference. And that difference for a shooter is so much, especially if you think that their skill sets are comparable, and they kind of are. When you look at the player that Tyler Hero was in his first year, I mean, they both have very similar strengths and weaknesses. In all honesty, defense is a question mark, rebounding and shooting is a strength, movement shooting. So yeah, I think Grady, if Grady becomes a taller Tyler Hero, like that's a star. Like that's a max player. You know what I mean? So I am happier than ever that the Raptors shifted focus towards development. I think that the staff that they brought in is just really committed to making these guys good. And I think that they can see that. Like, and yes, there's a definite focus on winning. Darko Rakovic talked about that in an interview that, like winning is paramount. Winning is very important, not necessarily at the sacrifice of development, but, there's no other way to really know that what you're doing is working than to win. And there's no way to really shift the culture from the losing that has happened in the last few years other than to win. So the winning will be important, but naturally, like at some point, like if you're a player on this team, if you're one of those guys who's kind of in these summer runs, like you now know that the organization has doubled down on you, on your talent. You know what I mean? Like a lot of organizations wouldn't do that. A lot of organizations kind of dump the baby out with the bathwater. Hey, Precious Achua, you had a bad year. You're now on the trading block. The Raptors have basically said, you had a bad year and we understand why. And we're willing to put more resources, more infrastructure into you to make sure that you have a better career. And I think players can respect that, So anyways, hit subscribe if you haven't already. If you're watching this live later, definitely hit the like button and, feel free to, this information would have been greatly more appreciated at the beginning of the live, telling you to check the chat and sort of add along with it. I realize that sometimes the chat just basically functions as a debate for people having a conversation, and that these lives are more like me talking in the background for some people. especially people who watch live, I realized that for 172 of you, I would estimate that 20 of you are hate watching, waiting for me to say something stupid so you can clip it and put it on Twitter. I would anticipate at least 80 of you are just watching or listening while you're doing something else. And give it a like if you're watching and doing something else. And, I think the rest of you are probably just here to debate with other Raptor fans. And I think that that's great. No ego about it. That's totally cool. However, whatever utility these videos bring to you. Yeah. Anyways, talk to y'all later. Have a good one. Peace.